Let's make a start. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, just a little bit of housekeeping, I suppose. We've got about an hour to talk to you today about AI and responsible adoption. Obviously, it's a topic that's been constantly in the forefront of our conversations in our industry. And we're here for some real conversations, sharing some of those biggest challenges, the opportunities, the strategies around AI adoption that we've really learned as we've been working with some of the world's biggest companies in the world. And so we invite you to continue using the chat. Please share your questions throughout your experiences. We've got a very packed agenda. So if we don't have time to get back to your questions at the end of the session, we'll collate them and make sure to respond to them in our follow-up. But with that, I agree. Let's just start by introducing ourselves, Callum, shall we?
Absolutely.
So I am Tina. I am one of two learning experience consultants joining you today from Sponge. I've worked in learning and development for about 10 years, and I've had the pleasure to work across a whole range of industries from the third sector to tech to retail to pharma, really supporting our clients through their unique people enablement challenges and those large-scale transformations. I'm based in Berlin. I have lived in the US for 2 years and in Scotland for 9. So if you hear a bit of a weird twang in my accent, that'll be why. And I love learning. So when I'm not busy picking up the next DIY skill myself, I actually love supporting others to learn and to grow, which is really what drives me every day. And what about you, Callum?
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm Callum. I'm based in Valencia in Spain. I've been here for 5 years now. I'm also a learning experience consultant here at Sponge. And I've been working in people, learning and enablement roles pretty much throughout my entire career, from nonprofits right through to global corporates. My work's predominantly centered on designing programs and leading teams that upskill and enable people across a wide mixture of technical and communication skills. But I've got a particular focus and love of and interest of leadership and early talent development as well. Outside of work, when I get the chance, I love a bit of hiking and games of all types. And therefore, this pixelated image of myself that was designed by our multi-talented visual design team here at Sponge is probably my favorite image of me from 2025. To give you a bit more context about our work, both Tina and I work in the practice for Sponge, which is blending consultancy, research, and design experience to act as a strategic partner for all of our clients. Our roles center on diagnosing business and performance challenges, conducting needs analysis, co-creating concepts with stakeholders, and ensuring solutions and transformation strategies are really grounded in learning insights, behavioral science, and human-centered design. So we're really delighted to be here with you for the next hour. Lots to unpack and lots of the complexity around AI adoption that we really want to get into. So as a starting point, what we'd love to do is really ground ourselves in just some of the stats and a few insights that we think really highlight some of the challenges that we're exploring today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start with to kind of ground ourselves in a bit of context as to why we think that practical role-specific enablement to inspire, but also to guardrail AI use is really important. Number one, we keep seeing in different stats and figures that there's still a real lack of training. So for about 48% of employees, training is considered the most important factor for AI adoption. However, more than a fifth also report that they haven't received it. So it does reveal this real kind of disconnect between what employees demand from their organizations and what businesses provide. In addition, there's also a bit of resistance and stigma that we're still seeing with AI use. So we have about 53% of people who worry that using AI on those key tasks actually make them look replaceable. And then nearly the same number is also reluctant to actually admit to using it. So you have a real demonstration there that it's a topic that's filled with ethical dilemmas, where on the one hand, people might be feeling resistant, but also self-conscious to use it. And then finally, it links towards that risk of misuse. So 78% still bring their own tools to work. And of course, that's this uncontrolled shadow AI, as we term it. So it presents this massive cybersecurity and data privacy risk for organizations. So just a couple of different themes that we're going to come back to throughout the session. But first, Callum, you've got a quick exercise for us, and I'd love you to go through, this visual and just explain where that came from, because I believe you designed it for one of our clients.
Yeah, so I would assume for most of you as like learning professionals potentially on this call, that you're probably very familiar with the original version of this infographic, right? So this is the emotional cycle of change. Well, it turns out that we think it quite nicely works as a reflection activity or exercise, maybe just a conversation starter, as to how things might be going for you or your teams and your organization's AI adoption and practices. So I'd love to see it in the chat. Where are you right now? Maybe it's not you specifically in these sentiments or some of the kind of expressions that you see here, but perhaps you're seeing these voices in your teams or across your organization. So whether it's actual tool implementation or guiding the policies to ensure adoption risks are reduced, we know that there's like a real intense pressure and focus and challenges that compliance teams are dealing with in relation to this. We've been speaking to a lot of people about it and often think that a lot of us are kind of somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3 near the valley of despair. But I think there's hope, or at least we think that there's hope here. So wherever you are right now, we wanted to start our discussion today with this moment to reflect, because we actually think it speaks to a truth that successful or responsible adoption of any AI tooling, AI or otherwise, at its heart, it's a series of learning cycles, and it's a deeply human-centered challenge. So like any transformation journey, it requires deep understanding and designing for the humans who are at the center that are going to make any of this possible. And with that in mind, we want to focus on 3 distinct challenges that we see compliance leaders facing in particular, and some of the specific tactics that can support tackling this complexity.
Nice one. And we've just gotten a comment around, we're not sure if it's stage 1 uninformed optimism or stage 4 informed optimism. So it speaks to that exact challenge, doesn't it? Amazing. And just as Callum says, this is an intrinsically human challenge that we're trying to solve here. AI, it's a polarizing topic, right? We've got great opportunities and potential, but there's also a lot of risk and fear and stigma and, concerns about ethics associated with it, its societal impact. So when you consider that environment as a whole, how do you actually create the right conditions? How do you build a culture where there's the right environment, the right trust, and really the willingness in place for people to actually engage? And let's say you have the right conditions in place. How do you then enable the right behaviors to take root rather than reducing learning interventions to simple box ticking exercises that are separate from, your day-to-day work? And then finally, when we think about the speed of change that we're actually navigating and we're considering our compliance function as a whole, how do you actually avoid reacting and being in that, that passive enforcer position, and instead build a strategic approach to enabling responsible AI? So these are 3 challenges we're going to try and tackle today. And to kind of start unpacking them, let's take a moment first to kind of put ourselves into the shoes of our colleagues. So what we want to think about is, what are our learners, what are our people thinking? What is that spectrum of mindsets? And I want you for a moment to picture this person, Brianna. I term her the rapid adopter. Brianna is energetic, she's creative, she's constantly experimenting. She uses AI tools for everything from reports to client emails to brainstorming. She might be frustrated by slow policies, by these, heavy approvals, by wait and see culture, and she might share prompts and results kind of casually across tools. Maybe she's unaware of data exposure risks, or maybe she just takes those risks for granted. Either way, she feels like she's helping the company move forward. And even when rules are kind of lagging behind. She might also use her personal login or unapproved tools too to get around some of that red tape. But at her core, what Brianna represents to our organization is she really embodies that innovation, that creativity, and that kind of risk-seeking mindset. And I'd love to see a virtual show of hands. I think you can do that on your click button. Can you empathize with Brianna? Can you think of people within your organization who might represent this persona? I think it is the type of character that we often, and I can see some hands pointing out. So definitely we can kind of empathize with that. I think it's who we often think about when we consider the compliance risks of AI, someone who moves at pace without guardrails. But next up, I want you to think about a very different type of person. I want you to meet Alex next. I term Alex the resistor. And Alex is experienced. He's diligent. He values craftsmanship. He values integrity in his work. And Alex feels a real sense of pride in his expertise. And he's actually quite worried that, AI is going to devalue or replace that. He's deeply concerned about the ethical, the environmental impact of it, the bias, the long-term social impacts of AI. When we think about the environmental side, this is a fact I learned recently, but generating a 10-second AI video equates to charging 5 to 6 smartphones fully. So Alex is the type of person who's really concerned about that. And he feels that, expectations are rising faster than tools or training can really support around AI. And he tends to see it as a distraction from the real work, adding a bit of pressure without actually seeing the proven benefit behind it. And so who does Alex represent? Well, he embodies that scrutiny, that commitment to quality and that to ethical practice, and someone who we really don't want to ignore when we're thinking about, our AI strategy. Brianna. So let's put those people side by side and just consider for a second. Let's take a moment. Where would you place yourself on the spectrum between Alex and Brianna? Again, use the chat. Put a number in the chat. Reflect for a second. Who do you more closely align? Is there someone you more closely align with? We've got a quite big range of numbers showing up. Callum, who do you align with?
I think that one of the biggest things, and maybe this is being felt by people in the group as well too, is like I feel this tension, and I know that I've flipped between one side and the other, right? I would certainly say when AI kind of tool first emerged and burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, 100% was probably closer to Brianna, working in a learning organization, of course, naturally inclined to want to spend time exploring and looking at all the kind of amazing ways that these tools can be used. But I don't know, as the journey goes on, you continue to see the kind of tensions that can exist there, right? And I also really kind of deeply connect with some of the concerns that might be felt by someone like Alex. And I also think there's a real challenge here at the moment where in the ever increasing need to move faster, and obviously with large and critical agendas being pushed forward in relation to this, it might feel very hard for people within organizations to voice these concerns or speak to some of these challenges right now. And there might be to be seen as a blocker, right? And no one wants that. But if you're able to, it's that kind of thing of not recognizing that it's not binary, right? And and it's not a negative either. That sense of wanting to ensure that there's quality. And also, as we're increasingly seeing, statistics around the return on investment and actually the value of a lot of initiatives aren't showing up, right? And when we want to make sure critically that we're getting those decisions right, you need those voices and you need people who are prepared to be able to ask challenging questions around this. So I think it's a really interesting tension. And I think, to be honest, for me, I think one of the biggest things is just it's one that provokes a lot of strong emotions, right? Strong emotions, strong opinions, and a lot of uncertainty about the future. I think anyone saying with 100% confidence how this is going to work out in terms of its impact on roles and the future of work, I just don't think that's realistic yet,
Yeah, absolutely. couldn't agree more. And I think it really is a topic that triggers strong competing personal values when we think about it. So solving that challenge is really inherently a human challenge, just as you've been saying. And really, what we want to do is kind of foster the right culture where these mindsets can thrive side by side. So this kind of brings us to our first big challenge. How do we create the right conditions, the right culture for people to actually meaningfully engage with responsible AI? And we think there's three key elements to this. There's the hugely important task of building greater trust. There's rethinking our tone that we engage with our people or colleagues with. And then there's also creating a bit more agency and choice for them. And we're going to take you through them one by one. Let's start by looking at, the features and the opportunities for building trust. So let's put ourselves back into the shoes of our personas of Alex and Brianna. What are they really looking for? Well, when you really think about it, the first thing that both of them will be craving is consistency, right? Alex wants really clear boundaries around where we use AI and accountability for when it makes mistakes. And then Brianna might want access to just safe and approved tools. Both might be looking for clarity. For Alex, it's about proof of value. Where are we using AI and why? For Brianna, it's really about clear, practical guidance on how to use it in the right way. And then both seek safety, right? So Alex can ask the hard questions and Brianna doesn't feel judged for when she uses AI. And both need transparency. That means opportunities to co-design, but also spaces to share that learning. And so we see these as the core foundations that you need to have in place to develop trust with your people. And then there's also the way that you communicate that, the tone that you use as you build this.
Yeah, I think tone is such an interesting one, especially when we think about compliance learning, right? And we've shared this table because, again, for those of you that are learning professionals that have joined us today, you'll be very familiar with this, right? It's the differences between how we design learning and think about our language and tone and style when we're designing for children with pedagogy, adults with andragogy, and self-directed learning for hudagogy. And it's always that kind of direction of travel where most adults want to be moving towards self-directed learning. But in the compliance world, especially with the fact that it's around having to make sure that everyone is on board and that we're really thinking kind of with a 100% mindset, 100% of the organization has to go through this. So we have to be extremely explicit and extremely kind of clear with our tone and our language. Often it can end up sounding actually much more like that parent-child kind of relationship of authority, right? And talking down to people. And so it can end up feeling authoritative, basic, convoluted. But all of that actually sends signals about either like a lack of trust or a lack of care. And then regardless of whichever side of the spectrum you're on or whichever persona camp you might be in, it's really sending the signal of like, if you're not caring about the message and the tone and the quality, why should your learners at all? So we tend to see that in this kind of circumstance, when we want our learners to have more opportunities for self-direction, of course, we can build that into digital modules and digital learning. But it's actually, from our perspective, an opportunity to think beyond that as well. So what are the alternative ways or complementary touch points and methods of engagement that you can build that start to create more agency and more willingness to engage in a topic like this from, again, either end of the spectrum, which is such a crucial kind of step in behavior change. So let's have a look now at a few different examples of the ways in which the organizations think about this, but it's really just thinking a bit more holistically about what's required to actually shift behaviors in a meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key here is, open up that conversation, create choice. We want to meet learners where they are on that pedagogical level. And so that means we have to give them that agency, that voice, that space to contribute, the chance to be that autonomous, active participant in the process. And there's a lot of ways to soften and engage people with the topic of AI that are not part of your mandatory traditional learning. That's nurturing that trust and that ownership. And these can look widely different. There's just a couple of examples here for strategies we've recommended to our clients. But what's particularly important to us here at Sponge is that we identify the right intervention for what's going to have the greatest chance to succeed. So that's, the solution that meets learners where they're at using that, adult to adult tone and really providing them with that freedom to take part. So when we follow those key kind of recommendations, we build that greater trust, we rethink our tone, we offer that choice. What we're really doing is creating the foundations for people to feel less threatened by those competing values and really more likely to engage.
So if you have built foundations for people to engage, how can you then now enable specific behaviors to take root in the flow of day-to-day work? So here, what we want to do is focus on three distinct opportunities and needs. The first of which is really reflecting the day-to-day reality of your learners. The second is identifying the specific behavior shifts and how these can look radically different across teams. And then the last one, and we've already begun to touch on this, but we want to expand on it further, is to really think beyond content and much more towards cultural enablement.
Yeah, let's get into it. Reflecting reality. So you might have seen that we've recently published a white paper called Mobilizing Generation Numb. And we actually also launched a specific compliance edition that speaks to the state of our people at work and the challenges that it introduces specifically for the compliance function. So really encourage you to kind of to explore that if you haven't already. But it, really contextualizes a couple of figures, like the number of disruptive change initiatives has increased from 2 to 13 in the past 10 years every year. At the same time, the willingness to actually support those changes has dropped significantly. People are overwhelmed by that pace of change. Organizations talk about, having a low trust culture. Remote workers are burned out by digital tools. And in that environment where people are barely getting by in that day-to-day, those big global initiatives or isolated modules that are detached from the real work are going to struggle with engagement. So how can we instead localize the conversation to drive behavior change across different roles and responsibilities in the day-to-day? And so, Callum, you've got a great tool to take us through here.
Yeah, this is just one example method that we use to help clients explore and potentially map the granularity of what AI tooling and usage can look like from teams and very specific role usage. So on the left of this heat map, what you can do is break down your org by function and by role. And from there, actually begin to capture and map the specific behaviors and the change required in relation to AI tool usage, for example, because what you can do there is that not only identify the behavior shifts that reduce key risks, but explore what more transformative behaviors and practices might look like. So as we've discussed, both resistant and risky ends of this learner spectrum are likely to be in a non-compliant space. But you can use something like this to actually diagnose the maturity and that risk within individual teams. So how is a team currently using tools? Where are people confident? Where are they cautious? And where are they most exposed to risk? Once you have that, you can then identify opportunities for transformation. So where are the greatest gaps and where are your highest priority concerns? And what small changes in behavior have or could lead to the greatest outcomes and give you the biggest leverage in terms of reducing that risk. This is really just one specific exercise that we've used. But it's really kind of the central focus of this is about focusing on behavior shifts, right? Tina's going to talk to you a little bit more about another methodology that we apply that is across kind of a broader range, but it's really about nailing down these specific behavior shifts, and then what organizations can do to try and measure them practically as well.
Absolutely. And I just saw a question in this chat here around whether we're going to share the slides, and we won't share all the slides, but this is a specific resource that we are going to share with you because we think that it can really greatly inform your kind of AI strategy if this is something you want to explore further. There's other resources we share throughout, but you can definitely get in touch with us and we can kind of share some more of the information with you afterwards. But just as Callum said, let's take you through another great tool that we like to use. So let's say we've identified opportunities for transformation. How do we then support our colleagues in actually implementing those transformations? And this is our impact canvas, which we've used with many of our clients, and it's designed to take you directly from the desired transformation to the explicit behavior change, and then actually helps you set strategies to observe and measure that change specifically. So let's imagine for a second, we're looking at the sales team of a large global org, and it's already got AI tools like Microsoft Copilot, Salesforce, Einstein, Gong, ChatGPT Enterprise, part of their daily workflow, but adoption is uneven and often risky. So with that challenge, we like to start with a compelling question. This is the one that really narrows our focus. In this case, how do you build trust in AI-enabled selling so teams use it safely, smartly, and confidently? And so next up, we would capture the strategic direction and the key goals that the business is heading to. So in this case, things like navigating compliance risk, unrealized performance potential, or avoidance of quality risk. And then we consider what are the key capabilities that our people need to have? What does this capability look like on the job in the day-to-day? And what results are these going to yield for our organization? So once we've captured it, this is where we get into even more depth and zoom into more detail. What are the specific behaviors that our colleagues are exhibiting now? What are the desired behaviors that we want to foster instead? That are going to lead us to those desired organizational results that we've identified. So if we think about our sales team, we might them to focus less on gut feel for prioritizing accounts and more on AI-driven insights, or we might want them to focus on quality of outreach instead of quantity of outreach by using personalized comms and targets using AI insights. Just a couple of examples, right? And so next up, let's zoom in even further. We've outlined our desired behaviors. How do we map those to key performance moments within the role? So really specifying when should our colleagues do what to yield those desired business outcomes. And finally, once we have those specific performance moments established, all of our behavioral prep work, it can help us establish a detailed, informed measurement plan that goes beyond your standard measures. So how do you actually know if behaviors have been implemented, and do they actually bring the desired outcomes that we foresaw? So this is where we craft a bespoke measurement intervention, like, let's say quarterly pulse check or a manager checklist in monthly one-to-ones to really gauge straight away the impact that we're having. So just an example here to just bring to life, offer sort of a whistle-stop tour of how you can think about behavior change strategically and build evaluation in straight from the start so you can move in an agile way. Finally, just as Callum said, once we have considered our learners' reality and we've specified the behaviors that we want to shift, now it's time to design our learning intervention. And here, I want you to remember that traditional compliance modules are not always going to be the answer. Let's think instead about what support our learners are going to need in the moments that matter. So Formal learning might be the way if you are hearing something for the first time or you're wanting to learn more. But if you're trying to remember something, if things have changed in your organization, if there are new tools that have been introduced, if something's gone wrong or you've made a mistake, there's support needed in specific performance moments. So, how can you embed learning in those real moments of work and build systems that shift, that support and sustain those behavior shifts specifically?
So I'm going to bring us on to our final challenge that we want to speak a little bit about today. So most of what we've been talking about so far has been focused on what our learners are experiencing and need. But we thought it'd be really valuable just to kind of pull that back to say, well, what do we see happening in our teams, specifically compliance teams, but those of you that are leading them or involved in this, what can we do to help ensure that you're building lasting strategic approaches to responsible AI use that ultimately is able to keep up with the pace of change? And this pace of change is, I think, like it's a core center of all of this and what we're kind of speaking about today. We've shared this image already, but we wanted to bring it back because the central premise here being, if most employees are experiencing a combination of overwhelm, which could be leading to, as we described in the white paper, this sense of numb or like an inability to push these things forward in a strategic way, what can we do to enable compliance teams to get out of the churn or the overwhelm that they might be experiencing? So we know that on any given week at the moment, we know that something new may be landing on people's desks and that they have to respond to in a really reactive manner. So it could be a tool that's already been used that actually hasn't been vetted properly. It could be an AI feature that could be due to launch that you're releasing to your customers that maybe hasn't had the full sign-off or clear sign-off yet. Or it could be to do with regulation, right? Again, especially if you're working in a global organization, the differences between perhaps North America and Europe right now in terms of regulation or deregulation, lots of different complexity that teams are having to navigate there. So this overwhelm is very real. And on top of that, increasingly what we see and what we hear is that leadership wants strategic support from their compliance teams. It's not just about training. It's about being a partner in supporting transformation and to really help move fast and with responsibility as well too. So one of the ways that we like to frame this and think about it is like, how do you build momentum? So from our research, one of the things that we think that this very much depends on is what stage of inertia that your team or individuals might be struggling with. So let's take a quick look at those. Our next recommendations over the kind of this final part of the conversation today is really based on the assumption that your teams are here in the highlighted kind of third section of this conversation around what we would describe as the it stage. In what we describe in mobilizing generation numb as the it phase, this is where your team are in a positive position to rally around a huge challenge. Now, if you're not sure what I'm referring to there, if you haven't had a chance to read the paper or not, what we're saying is that if there are deeper or more specific and complex challenges that you think your team are facing, we'd recommend having a look at this and having a look at specifically the compliance edition of it to really understand and explore the tactics for about helping people move through each of these phases from me to us and to it. And quite simply, the idea is that if you're trying to solve incredible complexity, if you haven't addressed people's individual needs and those kind of first stages, you're never really going to be able to get people to rally around solving like really complex problems. So how do you get to this stage where you have people together in a position to try and solve together? But if you do feel that you have a team that's able to do this, how can we help them build momentum? So let's take a look at 3 final tactics and suggestions that we want to share today. We want to finish just simply with a few ideas and resources which are just designed to help reduce overwhelm. The first of which is around setting the vision and ways in which you can explore this idea of early adopters, and that might support you building partnerships and coalitions. The second is around supporting meaningful habits and opportunities to experiment in your teams, in your habits, in your daily rituals. And the last one about cognitive offloading, this word or this term that has exploded in popularity due to the kind of rise of AI, and what you can do to help support teams with this as well. But all of this is really centered around creating habits and practices and support mechanisms that are about encouraging meaningful experimentation and new coalitions. So When it comes to setting the vision, I love this slide. I am gratefully stealing this from a range of incredible other speakers who have shared this ahead of me. Like this actually, the diffusion of innovation, again, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this. It's a well-established theoretical model in social science. Describes how new ideas and products or behaviors spread through a population over time. It was formalized by Everett Rogers in 1962. It's widely applied in marketing, management, and social research. But most of us, if you're on the call today, would be familiar with it in recent years from a lot of great content and ideas communicated by Simon Sinek. I'm not going to attempt to reproduce that thinking here today, but I do think it's worth pointing out or just explaining a little bit of an intro to it, because I think it's very easy to ignore something like this and this idea of the early adopter mindset when we're thinking about compliance solutions. Again, back to this concept of kind of the 100% mindset. We need everyone in the organization to take part in this. Therefore, we have to start with designing and building with that 100% in mind. But I think that's like missing a trick because we're often thinking in that kind of 100% mindset. You're missing this opportunity to start small with pilots and partnerships. And when you do that, by finding your partners across the organization who specifically might be looking at trying to co-create or surround a really complex problem together, it opens up opportunities for you to do more of the things that we were referring to before in terms of building these additional experiences or ways in which learners can engage beyond a core learning or beyond a core module. You can do things that ultimately attract committed participants and collaborators. So if you start with a small pilot, who do you find within the organization that actually would be really willing and interested to test out new learning opportunities? In doing so, establish genuine value and actually figure out what's really going to work and then worth scaling. Build organic excitement, generate word of mouth buzz about something that people haven't yet had a chance to go through or participate in. And also this idea of like creating scarcity. Again, not something you would normally think of in relation to compliance learning, but this possibility of like, people want what they can't have, right? And if you set up an opportunity for some people within the organization to participate and engage with something, it might be the thing that starts to unlock momentum around people engaging with the topic or engaging with new ideas that bring people along on this journey with them. So it might often not always do we think about starting small in this space, but I think starting small when teams are overwhelmed can really start to drive momentum to drive large scale change. And this like mindset also really applies to our habits and our rituals, which is what I'd like to talk to you next. So again, this is a recommendation that we just want to share with you all. This book has been around for a decent amount of time now, but we're huge fans of it. This specifically, in all of James Clear's research, we like it so much because it's approachable. And it removes a lot of the jargon which can often get in the way when engaging with wider stakeholders across an organization. But it's really focused on supporting the development and the many different ways that teams, individuals can build new habits and behaviors incrementally, which makes shifts much more possible, especially when teams may be overwhelmed. So again, if you haven't read the book, if you haven't seen it, highly recommend you go out and listen to it or grab it however you can. But there's just a couple of kind of sections of this that we wanted to speak to today. These are just 3 examples from the book: identity-based habits, habit stacking, and environment design, which tap into personal values, easy ways to build new habits by stacking or anchoring them with existing ones, and how you can think differently about your environment. Now, whether that's physical or digital, to increase or potentially decrease friction that can help you build new patterns of behavior that can really add up. Sometimes within an organization context, we know that big changes have to happen really rapidly across teams. But there are other times when you can set smaller wheels in motion that potentially ease the pressure gradually, or that might fade into view over time because it's lots of smaller pieces that start to add up. So what we see tends to really work when these teams are experiencing this is that encouraging meaningful experimentation here with new individual and team habits can actually really create a groundswell of change. Tina, I know we've spent so much time talking about this, but yeah, so I have to ask for your kind of thoughts and reflections on it as well.
Yeah, we do use this book a lot because it just helps you break down big, difficult challenges into small, tangible things. So let's use a personal example, right? I see myself as an active person because I identify as such. I want to be an active person, so that motivates me to go to the gym more. great example of like an identity-based habit. Or let's say something I've started to do is when I sit down to work, I always fill a bottle of water in the morning. So sitting down actually reminds me to do it. So I get up again, I fill it up, I sit down, I've stacked my habit in the morning, but it's also an environmental design because now I have this bottle beside me and it's very easy for me to follow a healthier habit and drink more. Very, very simple examples, but you know, let's think about that in our teams. What are the small, tiny little daily things that you can do in your teams to keep you moving in that desired strategic direction, support those micro 1% movements towards where it is you're heading in your organization? I just think it's such a great tool to think about it that way.
Yes, I'm deeply grateful for the person that introduced me to the book, because without it, I wouldn't have got, so living in Spain for 5 years, still need to conjugate my verbs every single day, and like waking up every morning and doing like going through that activity as I brush my teeth. That was like my habit stacking miracle. It's actually gradually making me feel well, and it stacks up, right? I do it every day, and I'm slowly making more progress than I would be otherwise. So yeah, it's been a big one for me. So yeah, this. It can often feel deceptively simple, but again, when we're talking to many different teams that are saying, how do we think and act more strategically, the ability to break it out into smaller things that can add up can be very, very powerful. The last thing that we wanted to talk a little bit about today was this idea of cognitive offloading with you all. So again, I don't think, of course, the term has been around for a long time, but I don't think it has been as mainstream as it is now, or as understood in kind of certainly learning and wider circles as it is since the advent and explosion of AI tooling over the last couple of years, right? So it's become so much more prevalent because, quite simply, AI tooling is providing this role for so many teams and functions. Now, the debate about the value and the problems and challenges that this can cause by using this as a method to cognitively offload is another entire webinar, and one that we should put a pin in for now. All to be said, lots and lots of people are obviously using it for this reason, to try and drive productivity, to help us support us in all of our works, and to try and ultimately help with overwhelm, right? When it comes to the different ways you can provide cognitive offloading for your teams, of course, you can use approved AI tooling itself to solve for many different things. But when it comes to strategic or large scale transformation, this is actually where we can help the most. And it's where we love to help as well. So we know that great partnership or collaboration is actually often about the externalization of that cognitive or strategic load. So from the frameworks that we bring in, the expertise across our organization, structured processes that ultimately free your team from internally reinventing or like shouldering the full burden of that complexity. It allows internal teams to then focus on execution, leadership, and internal culture as an example, whilst we can support with things like design, benchmarking, and bringing in a whole range of mixed methodologies. And this actually also helps reduce strategic and operational risks by applying these tested approaches and avoiding common pitfalls that can arrive when we go through these large-scale transformation processes. So our role is very much to provide that structure and guidance and support to help make strategic decisions ultimately faster and with greater confidence. So if there is anything from today's content or otherwise that you'd like to explore further, we'd really just love to connect with you. Say hello and listen to what's going on in your world right now. We're in good time. We're coming towards the end of the session. But just before we wrap up, if there are any questions or kind of things that you've seen from the session today, we'd love to see them in the chat. I'd be really happy to try and answer some questions before we wrap up. But yeah, let's have a look at kind of our conclusion of the areas that we've spoken about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about three really big challenges and taking you through what we really feel like underpin, the challenges of responsible AI adoption. Challenge one, we talked about those polarizing mindsets, the competing values, the emotions that really can split our audience and our minds at times. So to really engage them meaningfully. What are the conditions that have to be in place? What's the culture that we need to build? And we've left you with three really big priorities. Number one, build greater trust. Number two, rethink the tone of your comms. And number three, create the choice and the autonomy for your people to engage. And so once you've built this foundation to set yourself up for success, then you can tackle challenge two, which is to help responsible AI behaviors take root in the flow of real work. So to do so, you have to start by understanding and reflecting your learners' reality. Diagnose the state of AI use. So this is where we showed you the fluency map before you identify those opportunities for transformation and really identify the specific behaviors that you'd like to shift. And now, as you're considering how you enable your people to shift those behaviors, think about where this would be most impactful. Think beyond content to consider the real moment of need. And then finally, for the third challenge, and considering your whole compliance function and the speed of change that we're trying to stay ahead of, we've looked at challenge three, which is building a lasting approach to responsible AI rather than reacting to those changes or, being put in the position of being this passive, authoritative enforcer. So this is about setting a vision that's co-created with your innovators and your early adopters, and really just not being afraid to start small. Use those strategies to support habits meaningfully. And we've talked about how you can harness those great insights from James Clear to really build and sustain that momentum there. And finally, when this challenge feels overwhelming and, unsurmountable at times, consider how you can use cognitive offload. So seek out partnerships so that, some of those responsibilities can be diffused. We're here at Sponge to be partners should you need it. We've supported many of our clients through their individual challenges and are really happy to talk to you about yours. Hopefully we've got some questions in the chat by now. I'll take a look at the moment, but just again to go over some of the resources that we've spoken to you about. So we've talked about the emotional cycle of your AI strategy, the pedagogy to pedagogy table, the impact canvas, James Clear's atomic habits, just a couple of highlights on tools that you can use and that we're happy to talk to you a bit more about too. We are also sharing these specific resources in the chat just because we feel like they're particularly important and useful to you as you're embarking on this strategy. So look out for a message from Alex, who's going to be sharing those. If you want to learn more about us, definitely get in touch with us at Sponge. We also have QR codes for our LinkedIn, mine and Callum's. So definitely connect with us. And yeah, shall we take some questions?
Yeah, well, I think we've got there aren't any specific questions in the chat right now, but there was a call out from Melanie that I think is just really nice to give a shout out to, just expressing how she's encouraged other team members to block out time in their calendar every day to just do 10 minutes of exploring. And I just want to say, like, I love that. And if I'd had more time or another section of this, I probably would have spoken to a previous organization I worked for had this lovely language around the idea of tinkering, which I just really admire. And it could be applied obviously in relation to AI, but it can be applied obviously in lots of different contexts, the concept of tinkering and that discovery process without necessarily a specific outcome at the end of it. It's been around for, forever. But it's lovely, right? Which is like, it doesn't have to have a very specific intended outcome or goal, but the sheer discovery process. What is it that you do, and the pathways in which you choose to tinker with something that really, pushes you. You have a team channel called Tinkertown.
I love
Amazing.
that.
Love it. Like, yeah, exactly that. What are you discovering off your own back? What provokes and sparks your interest and curiosity. And if you are in the fortunate position where either your team or your organization can give you that time and that space, I think that's an amazing thing. I think that applies in so many different capacities, but 100% to that kind of providing that opportunity and space for people to understand the tooling, understand its limits, its constraints, and its risks as well too. So thank you so much, Melanie and Hal, for sharing those as well. So yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you all so much for your participation and sharing today. It's been really, really lovely to get to spend a bit of time with you all. As Tina said, our contact details are here. We hope that you found this valuable. With that, we're going to give you the last few minutes of this hour back. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, we really hope to look forward to seeing you another conversation soon. So have a lovely rest of your day, whether that's a full day, you're at the end of your day, or otherwise. We'll say bye for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great one.